I think it's 5 o'clock, punctual as ever. Let's start, because some people are coming from far and have to go back far. I want to start so that I will not forget it at the end, to thank the people who have contributed to these talks by their sympathy and their help and their care. First of all, of course, Sradavan, who has been so kind to invite me here for these talks in the beautiful Savitri Bhavan. And not only Sradavan herself, but also her staff, who have been very kind, although many had not seen me here for some time. Then I also want to thank the people who have helped with the installation. For instance, Joel, who has done the sound installation, then the people of Aurobindo Radio, who have been there 10 times, because this is the 10th talk in a series, who have been there faithfully every time to record and to broadcast and to make afterwards CDs of these talks. I also want to thank Sergei, who as faithfully as the sound people have been there with his camera, everything, to record and to make the beautiful DVDs. Then I want to thank Antim and Muriel, who have come every time to take me by taxi, to bring me here and to take me back so that I would not get lost. And then, last but not least, Bindu and Karol, who were at the origin when we decided, in rather risky circumstances, when we decided to take the risk to plan 10 talks, because at that time my health was rather fickle. So now we are here and we are going to consider a little one of the most difficult problems in theology and in everyday life. And that is, why is the world so difficult? Why is life so difficult? Why has God made the world as it is, as we experience it, as we know it? Theodicy is a Greek word. Actually consists of 2 Greek words. The one is one you know very well, theos, theology, and so on and so on. Theos means God, and dike, which means justice. So the Oxford Dictionary, in case you don't know the word theodicy, defines it as follows: it is the vindication of divine providence in view of the existence of evil. It may be pretentious, but I would like to add something. And I would call it the justification of the divine in view of the existence of evil and suffering. And that is, of course, the questions we put to ourselves when a relationship is not working as it should or breaks off, when a football player misses a penalty, when we get cancer, when we get older and live in the prospect of the end of life. Why does life have to be like that? Why do we have to suffer? Why do we have to suffer to carry this body that gives us so much trouble? This is the theodicy question. The problem exists in all religions, because all religions have to answer this question, which is asked by all their followers, and they have to give an answer to justify, to vindicate their God. It is the intractable problem of evil, as Sri Aurobindo calls it. And in the Life Divine, he puts it squarely. As any problem in the Life Divine is put squarely, and Sri Aurobindo has said we have to consider everything that comes to our mind and that we are confronted with in life. We have to consider everything honestly, sincerely, and even bluntly. And he writes, God being all good, who created pain and evil? If we say that pain is a trial and an ordeal, we do not solve the moral problem. We arrive at an immoral or non-moral God. An excellent world mechanist, perhaps, a cunning psychologist, but not a God of good and love whom we can worship. Only a God of might, like the God of the Old Testament, to whose law we must submit, or whose caprice we may hope to propitiate. For one who invents torture as a means of test and ordeal stands convicted either of deliberate cruelty or of moral insensibility and, if a moral being at all, is inferior to the highest instinct of his own creatures. Then, of course, evil and suffering is one of the main arguments which atheists and anti-theists are using. For instance, Bertrand Russell, when you consider all the physical suffering that there is in the world, when you consider the stupidity of a good number of people, when you consider the cataclysms of nature, when you consider that all of human life is only a transitory phase of the universe, I think it is difficult to suppose that the omnipotence of God could not have done better. And Richard Dawkins, now the man in the front line of the anti-religious movement in science, writes, "The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference." And Paul Davies, another scientist, much more reasonable, writes, "Omnipotence raises some awkward theological questions. Is God free to prevent evil? If he is omnipotent, yes. Why then does he fail to do so? This devastating argument was deployed by David Hume, the British philosopher. If the evil in the world is from the intention of the deity, then he is not benevolent. If the evil is contrary to his intention, he is not omnipotent. He cannot be both omnipotent and benevolent, as most religions claim. And then, of course, the question comes back and comes back throughout human history, because these are the human questions and complaints. And then I must say, I have written a book on Hitler and his God. I have not found the solution or the answer to why the Jewish people had to suffer that Holocaust. And when in 2004, the tsunami coming from a sea which without here has no other side, all at once kills all these thousands of people everywhere around on the coast, 200,000. I followed in the publications as much as possible that the question now is not put so sharply anymore. It is as we are living in a period where humanity is holding its breath, doesn't know exactly what to think about a God or no God, doesn't know what to think where the world is going, as if it is holding its breath. And the answer, I have not seen any serious question or answer to the problem why so many people at once had to die by a sea which was their friend or had been their friend for hundreds of years. Because where I am from, if you go a few kilometers to the coast, you see at the other side, you see England. But here, when you are at the seaside, you do not see anything for miles and miles and miles. And the sea has always given people their sustenance and everything they got accustomed to expect from it, and all at once out of it comes this tsunami and just drowns, kills, and devastates. The Catholic religion has an answer to the Theodicy question. And what is the answer? It's not God's fault. It's the human's fault. It's Adam's fault, who has eaten from the apple. He has disobeyed God. And because he has done that, being the first human, all the rest of humanity has inherited that sin, which is called the original sin. That is the reason why we are suffering. That is the reason why little babies who are not baptized in the Catholic faith go to hell, where they will burn for eternity. Such things are said by human beings, incredibly but true, in a cruelty which does not even seem to be realized. From the standpoint here of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, of course, and of India, we have the Vedic affirmation. The basis, the fundamental basis, the first premise, Sri Aurobindo calls it, from which all reasonings start. If it be true that the self alone exists, it must also be true that all is the self. All is that. Brahman is the Alpha and the Omega. And if the self, God or Brahman, is no helpless state, no bounded power, no limited personality, but the self-conscious all, there must be some good and inherent reason in it for the manifestation. The discord and apparent evil of the world must in their sphere be admitted. For we cannot suppose that the soul entity is compelled by something outside or other than itself, since no such thing exists. If there is evil, if there is suffering, it is because in the divine it is willed like that. Even if we say that the universe exists merely because the self, in its absolute impartiality, tolerates all things alike, viewing with indifference all actualities and all possibilities, yet there is something that wills the manifestation and supports it, and this cannot be something other than the All, with a capital letter. Brahman is indivisible in all things, and whatever is willed in the world has been ultimately willed by the Brahman. That is a strong statement. So now let's consider the question I propose from two sides, from Sri Aurobindo and the Mother's perspective, one from above, one from below. And the one from above starts, of course, with what the divine is said to be by the rishis and the Vedantic seers, that is Sat Chitapas Ananda. Ananda, joy, bliss, whatever you want to translate it, but surely the absolute opposite of suffering and pain. All being Satchitananda, how can pain and suffering at all exist? Asks Sri Aurobindo in the Life Divine. It is the joy that has created. It's the joy that will accomplish. C'est la joie qui a créé, c'est la joie qui accomplira, said the Mother. And Sri Aurobindo again, delight is existence. Delight is the secret of creation. Delight is the root of birth. Delight is the cause of remaining in existence. Delight is the end of birth, and that into which creation ceases. From Ananda, says the Upanishad, all existence is born. By Ananda, the existences remain in being and increase. To Ananda, they depart. The truth is Ananda, says Sri Aurobindo, but this is a knowledge for which mankind is not ready. In the Life Divine, he has written 2 chapters about exactly this problem. They are called Delight of Existence. The first one, the problem. The second one, the solution. Absoluteness of conscious existence is illimitable bliss of conscious existence. The two are only different phrases of the same thing. So then we have this experience in our life of this difficult life which necessitates yoga so that it may change, be transformed and become better. And Sri Aurobindo treats this proposal and proposition in 4 ways. The first one, we shall find that the sum of the pleasure of existence far exceeds the sum of the pain of existence. We shall find that the sum of the pleasure of existence far exceeds the sum of the pain of existence. Well, when I read that for the first time, I had never thought of that. Because what Sri Aurobindo says here, pain is a phenomenon, while the deeper way of living unconsciously, inconsciently, is the joy of existence. Precisely because the latter is normal, pain, we do not treasure it. Precisely the great pleasure of existence, the Ananda that has created everything and that is in us, because we are not aware of it, we do not treasure it. But Sri Aurobindo says, this is the reason that people want to remain in existence. This is the reason that I do not want to live even a very difficult life. And this is not only the problem and the fact with the humans, is the fact with the whole of creation, with the song of the birds, with the copulation of the snakes, and with everything that you see, the growth of the trees and the growth of the plants is supported by that Ananda, that joy of being. Becoming aware of it was one of the facts that Sri Aurobindo had to realize in his yoga. Because you may have read about in the record of yoga about the Sapta Chatustaya. And one of these is becoming aware of the delight of being, which in us is subconscious, while as a yogi, he and all the ones who want to follow him have to become aware of it so that it becomes a fact of conscious surface life. The second fact which he brings to the fore is the difficulty of the Theodicy arises only if we assume the existence of an extra-cosmic personal God. A Yahweh, a Jehovah, or a demiurge. Not himself the universe, one who has created good and evil, pain and suffering for his creatures, but himself stands above it and is unaffected by them. Watching, ruling, doing his will with the suffering and struggling world, or, if not doing his will, if allowing the world to be driven by an inexorable law, then not God, not omnipotent, not all good, and all loving. The problem is because we always say God has created the world. So he has created evil. He is the source and the reason. Sri Aurobindo says, all that is he. If then evil and suffering exist, It is he that bears the evil and suffering in the creature in whom he has embodied himself. We are sitting here being God. Because all is that, we are that, and becoming conscious is our profession. The problem then, says Sri Aurobindo, changes entirely. The question is no longer how came God to create for his creatures a suffering and evil of which he is himself incapable and therefore immune, but how came the soul and infinite existent consciousness bliss, Satchitananda, to admit into itself that which is not bliss, that which seems to be the positive negation of bliss. All is that God has taken that into himself. The divine has taken, it's a preferable name for God, there is the divine, because even the mother has said many times God is overused and difficult to use word because it is always associated with the extra cosmic God. We are that. Tat Tvamasi. All you here sitting are sitting here being God, and I also a little IT. Then Sri Aurobindo has a third consideration. We do not live in an ethical world. Ethics is a matter of the mind. It is a judgment about things. This is good, that is evil. This is bliss, that is suffering. It is a mental awareness which is typical for the human beings, which are a transitional species in the evolution. The world itself, as such, is not ethical. There is no ethics in the animals. There is no ethics, of course, in matter. There will be no ethics in what is to come and what Sri Aurobindo called the supermind. And that is a very important factor in the consideration of this problem. We are ethical beings. We are living in a way that judges and that demands of God that he should be good. That, in my opinion, is a big mistake. Because it is already Plato at the origin of the Western philosophy who has called God, or the divine, the good. So much so that the good, with a capital letter, was synonymous of what we would consider the Brahman. For Plato, for that time, for the followers of that philosopher. And to name God good is to bring in an ethical element. It is not there in the Vedic premise, Sat Chit Ananda, Sat Chitapas Ananda. There is not a matter of good, there is a matter of Ananda. And Ananda is joy or bliss, Ananda is love. And that is very different from good. Love is good. But the divine love is something quite different from what we consider to be an ethical way of loving, or even a little lower, a kind of animalistic way of loving. The two or the three are always mixed, and this is one of the problems of life. We must first make it clear, says Sri Aurobindo, we must first make it clear to ourselves that just as when we speak of universal consciousness, we mean something different from, more essential and wider than the waking mental consciousness of the human being. So also when we speak of universal delight of existence, we mean something different from, more essential and wider than the ordinary emotional and sensational pleasure of the individual human creature. It is something big behind, the one thing that is always there, of which we are not aware, while in our surface way of thinking and judging, we call it otherwise. The world as perceived by the humans has three layers: infra-ethical, ethical, supra-ethical. The ethical standpoint applies only to a temporary, though all-important passage from one universality to another. In the passage to higher forms, there intervenes the phenomenon of pain and suffering, which seems to contradict the fundamental nature of its being. This, and this alone, is the root problem. So Sri Aurobindo says, in the evolution, it is only that temporary layer represented and formed and worked out by the humans, which is ethical, and where this problem arises. And the mother had a kind of radical reflection on that, and she says, "Ça nous fait une belle jambe." And this means, thank you very much. Because there we will see a little farther in our other consideration, there is the problem that is a human problem. The animals, lower animals, do not seem to suffer in our way, and afterwards, of course, in the supramental way of being, or in the worlds that lead to it, it will not be there anymore. It's the reason of the coming of the avatar, it's the reason of the yoga. Sri Aurobindo says there is an Ananda Maya behind the Mano Maya, a vast bliss self behind the limited mental self. And the latter is only a shadowy image and disturbed reflection of the former. The truth of ourselves lies within and not on the surface. You see that here we have an explanation which demands not only deep reflection, long consideration, but also the practice of going deep within, where the Anandamaya is there behind the Manomaya. Manomaya is the Maya, the perception of the senses in our being. It demands a yoga. It demands a becoming conscious, and that is, of course, the reason why Sri Aurobindo has said it is not, the explanation of Theodicy is not for the ordinary human comprehension. For he also says, suppose, for instance, that all remained happiness, that there was no friction, which we call pain, then there would never have been an evolution. Everything would have remained like it was, because everything would have been completely satisfied in its mode of being, in its state of being. And that is, of course, what Sri Aurobindo exactly said about the other worlds. Pain and suffering and evil and death are only in our evolutionary world. In the other levels, vital, mental, and spiritual, which he calls typal worlds, there is no evolution, there is no suffering. All beings are fully satisfied in their way of being. That's one of the reasons that if the gods want to become supramental, they have to take up a body. They have to come into an evolutionary world, which is us. And who has chosen to be in this evolutionary world? Our souls. If one does not accept the spiritual, the spirit, these considerations make no sense. If there is no spirit, why think about it? Why God would be responsible? Why human would be responsible? There is no sat, nor chit, nor tapas, nor ananda. The problem does not exist. If one accepts the spiritual, the spirit, but has not realized the cosmic consciousness, where one goes into the Anandamaya and into the yoga, these considerations are not concretely comprehensible. Sri Aurobindo has said the humans cannot comprehend, not catch it, not grasp. But if the experience of the fundamental Vedantic premise, all is that, and of the Vedantic explanation of the universe is valid, the logical conclusions of these considerations is inevitable. Ananda must be there. It must be a temporary, in our station in the evolution, a temporary interpretation, and of course a very unpleasant, if not worse, experience. Because of this, Sri Aurobindo wrote in Savitri, bliss is the secret stuff of all that lives. Even pain and grief are garbs of the word delight. It hides behind thy sorrow and thy cry. And Narad in the Book of Faith says to the parents of Savitri, the world's dread teacher, the creator, pain. Where ignorance is, there suffering too must come. Where ignorance is, there suffering too must come. Pain was the firstborn of the inconscious, which was thy body's dumb original base. Pain is the hammer of the gods, to break a dead resistance in the mortal's breast. Pain is the hand of nature, sculpturing man to greatness. That is a view from above. Worth surely considering, and if possible, integrating in our way of thinking, in our way of trying to mastering ourselves and to go a step forward, deeper into what the divine in us represents. Then there is the view from below. Nature does not make mistakes. All action, all mental, vital, physical activities in the world are the operation of a universal energy. A consciousness force, which is the power of the cosmic spirit, working out the cosmic and individual truth of things. All action, all mental, vital, physical activities. In reality, all that we call undivine can only be an action of the four divine principles themselves. The four, Sat, Chittapas, Ananda. The four divine principles represent the divine as a whole. Let's not forget, when we always read about consciousness, existence, consciousness, and bliss, that these are not separate things. These are ways of experiencing by the great seers and rishis of experiencing what the divine was, which are always one. It is the essence of naming what the divine is. It is the essence of approaching. These are not separate things. They are always together as a whole in what they saw and experienced as the divine. Each single act and movement falls by the fiat of the omnipotence, omniscience, which works as the supermind inherent in things. Each single act and movement, even these of my finger here, are possible because in it is the divine, here called the supermind, which is the manifesting power of the divine. As I said a while ago, rather jokingly, we are here sitting being God. Sri Aurobindo writes in the aphorisms, chance is not in the universe. So then if you read a little about science, you will see that there, everything that has come about is a matter of chance. And the evolution is a matter of chance. As I already have been saying here, Stephen Jay Gould will say the humans are there because at a certain moment it happened that there was a little animal in the sea called Pikaia, and then because before it happened so that there was a cell that diffusedly tried to procreate while feeding, procreate life, because of all these chance happenings, this whole chain of chance. That is why the humans are there. It's an enormous chance. It is so enormous that one could call it God. And that, of course, the more you go into science, the more you see that all their problems, anti-theistic or atheistic, are pure gas. Because they could as well accept the divine as not accept it and just do their science, try to find out what is there, have the pleasure of discovering. It does not matter one bit whether one is theist or not. But where does the problem come from? And that is very little realized. It is because in the West they had to stand up against the Catholic dogmatism. And the Catholic dogmatism had all these stories and all these explanations which, during the Enlightenment, the people say, sorry, this is not true. And their sorry, this is not true, is the whole movement of the Enlightenment, which threw out the baby with the bathwater. That God, if all this nonsense is done by him, cannot be a God. There is no God. There is only matter. It is a problem, a Western problem, created by the Christian Church. And all these people who are fighting today, don't think that I am talking about the past. All these people who are fighting militantly against religion and all that have no idea of spirituality. Religion and spirituality are two quite different things. All religion comes from a spiritual experience at the origin, but it is needed, formed, and fixed into fixed forms, which are the dogmas which you have to accept if you are a member of that religion and if you hope to go to heaven. Spirituality, the God within, is not a notion which the Western science has. It only is fighting chimeras created by a transformation of the original messages of Christ, of Paul of Tarsus, and of some other great mystics at the beginning. Chance is not at the universe. See, I went off at a tangent again. If all is the one, then nature in her entirety is the one. If all is the one, then nature is the one. What nature does, writes Sri Aurobindo, is really done by the Spirit. All her works are instinct with an absolute intelligence. It cannot be otherwise. World is the play of the mother of things, moved to cast herself forever into infinite forms and avid of eternally outpouring experiences. When we speak of the errors of nature, we use a figure illegitimately borrowed from our human psychology and experience. For in nature there are no errors, but only the deliberate measure of her paces, traced and retraced in a prefigured rhythm, of which each step has a meaning and its place in the action and reaction of her gradual advance. In nature, there are no errors, which I have formulated as nature does not make mistakes. We may be sure that if in nature destruction is done, says Sri Aurobindo, it is that for that end the destruction was indispensable. And you will read the same statement about Kali, the great Kali. When she destroys, it is because the destruction has to be done. The Mother has said so clearly in some of her conversations. But the explanation of Ananda, Anandamaya, Manomaya for us is difficult. Because we don't have that consciousness. And in fact, Sri Aurobindo has already said, for the humans, it's very difficult to understand. He actually says impossible. Why must evil and sorrow enter into the divine good, bliss and peace? It is hard to answer to the human intelligence on its own level. For the consciousness to which the origin of this phenomenon belongs, and to which it stands as it were automatically justified, is a supra-intellectual knowledge, is a cosmic and not an individualized human intelligence. It's a cosmic consciousness that is necessary to see why the divine has turned and felt the need to turn into his opposite, where then it has to rediscover itself, to have the joy of rediscovering ourselves, in which we are a critical and very essential element, the human being. To the human mind, one might answer that while in itself the infinite might be free from those perturbations, yet once manifestation began, infinite possibility also began. And among the infinite possibilities, which it is the function of the universal manifestation to work out, the negation, the apparent effective negation with all its consequences of the power, light, peace and bliss was very evidently one. Because there was the possibility to dive, to plunge, is a word often used by Sri Aurobindo in this context, to plunge into its negation for the joy of recovery, because the possibility was there, it had to be worked out. Because this is not a matter of reasoning or being aware as we have. In the divine, what is seen exists. And the Mother has even says, in her great Mother Nature, what is seen is created. And when you read the Bateau Supramental, the supramental ship, you will see how there she describes her presence. And her head is a sun. And from that sun go out like lightnings, she says, and these lightnings are effects and functions and acts of the will. There you have the Great Mother in action. Then there is the Gnostic explanation. I have already talked about the Gnostics, which I love so much, in my very first talk in the town hall. And this is a story by the Mother, which is in fact completely parallel with the Gnostic explanation of the Theodicy of the existence of good, evil, and suffering and pain. She says it's a story. Please be aware that it is a story, and she has to tell it as a story, because otherwise we could not follow, because it would be above our head. When the Supreme decided to exteriorize himself in order to be able to see himself, you see, this is just what I tried to say. When the Supreme decided to exteriorize himself, it is not exteriorize, in fact, it is to manifest, to form, to shape himself in order to be able to see himself. Another word would be to be aware of himself, to surely have the joy of knowing himself in his infinity. the first thing in himself which he exteriorized was the knowledge of the world and the power to create. What is that? The knowledge of the world and the power to create is the Great Mother. And there you have, in all these traditions, there is the one, and the one became two. He did not become, he always was two, because in infinity, as we have said last time, there is no time, there is no beginning. Everything has always been like that. Creation has always existed and will go on into infinity because it is since infinity. But the one is two, Ishvara, Shakti, Prakriti, and what is the opposite again? Purusha. You see, the one has always been two, and that other one, that creating, manifesting power, is the Mother, the Great Mother, in her essential greatness, because there are so many other personalities which she emanates, has emanated. It was the first thing he exteriorized was the knowledge of the world and the power to create. The Mother is telling herself, it was herself. This knowledge, consciousness, and force began to work. And in the supreme will there was a plan, and the first principle of this plan was the expression of both the essential joy and the essential freedom, which seemed to be the most interesting feature of this creation. And this is something that one does not read elsewhere. I have read a lot about Gnostics and all that. You will see the rest of the story is there. But the essential joy and the essential freedom. Now we have already talked a little about that joy that cannot not be there. It must be there. And that joy is equal to freedom. And that you do not see. The principle of the creation is joy and freedom. So intermediaries were needed to express this joy and freedom in forms. It has to be manifested within the divine. All the manifestation of all these worlds, and here that kind where the divine wanted to have to see itself in forms, materialized. So then the Mother took the great principles and gave them the mission to create this world. This world, as all the others, is created on the essential elements of the divine. Truth, light, which is consciousness, consciousness, which is light, life, love, which is joy, joy, which is love. And she gave them the task to manifest the world. But these are the highest attributes of the divine. So what happens is, every power in the world, here as well as in the highest levels and in the deeper ones below us, every consciousness is a being, every power is a being, every being is a power, every consciousness is a being. It may be very small, it may be very big, it may be the divine attributes. So she gave them the task to create. But they got, because of their freedom and the joy of their tasks, they forgot that they belong to what I have just said, the whole of the divine. They felt the divine and they acted as divine, and they separated in the great consciousness. They made the separation. And truth became falsehood. Light and consciousness became ignorance and inconscience. Life became death. Love and joy became suffering. And so the world plunged into the negation of what it was. But these great powers, these great beings, of which there are two which still exist, according to the mother. These great beings dived into their own world and created the opposite of the divine, which was the absolute darkness and blackness of the inconscient, of the ignorance of the great zero. Sri Aurobindo has written about them also. One finds everything what the mother has said confirmed in Sri Aurobindo, what Sri Aurobindo has said one finds confirmed in the mother. He writes, for instance, in his sonnet, The Iron Dictators, I looked for thee, the divine, thee alone, but my glance met the iron dreadful four who rule our breath, masters of falsehood, kings of ignorance, high sovereign lords of suffering and death. And you find this in other traditions. But here what the mother has given is the complete tradition of the four that are one. One finds them limited in other traditions, for instance in the Bible, in Isaiah, who shouts at Satan, at Lucifer, the angel of light, how are you fallen from heaven, day star, son of the dawn, originally? How are you fallen to earth, conqueror of the nations, Lord of the nations, Lord of falsehood? You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will ascend upon the high clouds, but you are brought down to darkness, to the depths of the pit. This is very clearly the same story which the mother told to the children in the ashram. And then the mother said at a certain moment, even the asuras, even the adversaries, even in the monsters, in spite of themselves, in spite of everything, their origin is divine because there is nothing else. Whatever they do to cut themselves loose from their origin, they cannot. And she will say, when she is talking about the Lord of falsehood, who is doing everything he can to counteract the evolution, the transformation of the world, she will say about him, the great Asura, after all, he is my son. And it is not often considered, exceptly not in devout circles, that there is the brilliant High Mother which is at the origin of all, or at the center of all, but that there is also the black Maya, the black Shakti, the dark Kali, which is the divine in its power to make these nether worlds in the pit. In what Arjuna saw, I have already spoken about the double vision in the essays of the Gita, where Arjuna says, I want to see you in your glory, in what you really are as the divine. And Krishna shows himself as the divine, brighter than 1,000 suns. But then afterwards he also shows himself as time the devourer, in all the horror which is created with a certain aim, otherwise it would not be there in the divine. The mother has often called this fall, this manifestation which necessitated the evolution, or which was prevision to create the evolution, an accident. And here we come to a very important factor, everything hangs together, that is, in the evolution there is a twofold movement, double movement. And this is very seldom considered. What I have just said, the four asuras who did that manifestation and necessitated was in fact the involution. How long did it take for the involution to come about? Maybe less than the blink of an eye, because it was an act of and in the divine by the Divine Mother. But then, how long does it take for the evolution to go back to the origin and have the joy from the absolute negation to discover itself? How long does that take? Well, we have all been through many lives before, without any doubt, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on, and it takes time. So, in the evolution, all the worlds were created, the typal worlds, the ladder of worlds, the world stair, as Sri Aurobindo calls it in Savitri. And then, now, little by little, slowly, the evolution takes it up. And what does the evolution do? Every time that a new layer is added through the aspiration of Mother Nature or whatever, every time a new layer is integrated, there has been the aspiration, there has to be the aspiration from below, and there has to be the consent from the level already existing in the involution. This is a very important fact, which is also important in the supramental transformation. Because I don't know what people expect from the supermind. Let's first try with the intermediary beings that may lead to the divinization of this. I don't know what they are expecting from the supermind, but it is never mentioned that when beings on the earth are ready from the supramental level, or one of the supramental levels, beings have to descend into these ready beings in the lower earth. Like for the mind, beings of the mental level descended into the bodies that were made ready by the primates and all the others. And Sri Aurobindo has very clearly said, the mind as we are using it, as it is given to us, is not the mind in the mental level. It is much lower because it is incarnated in the evolution. And it has to take into account to live in a material, vital body in its own level as a mind. It is much freer, much mightier, and much brighter, as you can see in the cantos which he has dedicated to that. This is an important thing. Involution, okay, but evolution has to integrate in two movements, aspiration from here, and that is what has the mother said to us when children said, "Mother, can we help?" The mother says, "No, luckily not, it is not necessary, but you can help by aspiring." And what are the elements of the integral yoga? It is surrender and aspiration. And the aspiration is what I have formulated in another talk as preparing for the miraculous, to master ourselves, to be ready for what may come, the unexpected. We are surely in the time of the unexpected now. It is the aspiration that carries. The aspiration was there in nature. The aspiration may have been there, and you see through the evolution how these animal forms get the four limbs, get the head, then get the upright position, then have the side of the eyes coming to the fore for perspectival side, and so on and so on. That is the aspiration of nature. The perversion starts with humanity, the ethical humanity, which has to climb up through the levels of the aspiration. Because Sri Aurobindo asked, where is that evil actually coming from? Is it something that is essential since the beginning? And if you read his Savitri, then you will see how there are these cantos dedicated to the descent into night and to the world of falsehood, the mother of evil and the sons of darkness. These worlds exist, and the beings there are perfectly happy, as he says in Savitri. So then, when the aspiration in the evolution climbs up, it integrates the material worlds, it integrates the vital. And it is in the lower vital that these demons of all kinds and all degrees exist. And it is from these worlds that they are pestering us with the greatest of pleasure, all we little dumb human beings. And then it climbs up to the lower mind. And the lower mind is the mind you have, the red ass and all these things in Savitri. He describes it so extensively. These are the kinds of minds which are our material mind, which are our lower vital minds, and where all these beings have a playground for their amusement, if it is worthy of them, because after all, human beings are less than ants to them. In the higher vital, there is nothing anymore. Because even when Sri Aurobindo wants to enter the higher vital, he will say at a certain moment, I could not enter that world yet because I was not pure enough. Sri Aurobindo, at that time of that phase of his yoga. So, then he concludes very logically that the pain, the suffering, the death and all that is the phase when evolution in the human touches on these lower levels of the lower vital and the lower mental. The perversion starts with humanity because we have that kind of mind. And Mother has several passages where she really, like a kind of litany, talks about the misery of the human being that it cannot foresee tomorrow. And it always wants to be sure, and it is living in eternal uncertainty. And that mind is always working what is going to happen. It creates the fear, it creates the uncertainty, it creates actually the pain of not knowing. And that is why I say the perversion starts with humanity. But of course, the glory of the consciousness also starts with humanity, because we are the cross, the X, there where the evolution takes a new elan. She says, this mind will fall away. But of course, like everything else, at a certain moment it must have been necessary. She says literally, parce que certaines cristallisations ont été nécessaires. Crystallizations of the mind, the divisions of that must have been necessary to go a step forward to become conscious. That is the original sin, the perversion which has come with the mental. And that is what is written in the Bible, symbolically, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, of which the first humans symbolically wanted to eat, wanted to know, while it was not yet given to him to have that knowledge. That is a great interpretation, but let's not forget that, for instance, in the Bible, most of the essential and very true and very symbolic facts come not from the Hebrews, they come from Babylonia. They come from Mesopotamia, where there was a great knowledge already among the Magi. The Hebrews have been taken prisoner and sent to Babylon. From there they have brought great real knowledge which is mixed with so much else. Then the mother had a great quarrel with nature. And that, of course, is quite amusing because she is nature. Mother says that, I think that nature is the most material part of the creative force. You could say in another way, nature is the emanation of the mother, which makes the evolution. And she had a great quarrel. The mother incarnated here. The great mother incarnated here had a great quarrel with her own emanation. Because she says, this nature likes so much waste, likes so much variation, to play with forms and to create from essential shapes, diverted shapes. And she is so playful and she is so slow. Because this mother had come, and Sri Aurobindo said the mother is always driven by this force, by this power for immediate realization. She had come for changing something so that the transformation could take place. And she said very clearly, we no longer want to obey the commands of nature, even if those commands have behind them habits of billions of years. Sri Aurobindo said, nature has to take the evolutionary decision. And then, during a long period, she has revolted. What is said here? It is quite simple that this materialization, everything turns about matter in its different shapes. It is not the matter of this. It's not only the matter of this. There is a subtle matter. There are many layers of matter, as science is finding out at the moment. She had made that. And the revolt is that if something is made, it is a person, it is a being. Mother Nature, described in Savitri, described in Gaia, by the Greeks known as the Earth Mother, by all the peoples known as the Earth Mother. It is a being, and she is doing her work. And then something comes and says, something has to change, you are going into another gear. No. She revolted, actually she resisted, actually the potentialities of nature as they were and are still for a great time deal at this moment were not accepting so immediately what would lead to another degree of being. But then in 1958 the mother gave a New Year's message. 1958, 2 years after the manifestation of the supermind. O nature, material mother, thou hast said that thou wilt collaborate, and there is no limit to the splendor of this collaboration. And she explained, nature in her play of forces has accepted the new force which has manifested and included it in her movements. And as always, the movements of nature are on a scale which is infinitely beyond the human scale and not visible to an ordinary human consciousness. It is an inner possibility which has come into the world rather than a spectacular change in earthly events. The miracles which take place, which are taking place, are not what could be called storybook miracles, in the sense that they do not happen as in stories. They are not spectacular. They are visible only to a very deep vision of things, very deep, very comprehensive, very fast. So here we have again what Sri Aurobindo has said in other words. It's difficult for us to grasp it, to grab it. It is in fact a matter of consciousness, of growth of consciousness, which we can undertake. The mother said, matter is ready to fuse with spirit. And that is the crux of everything. The formation in which what we call matter, which at the origin the divine wanted to see himself, as the mother said at the beginning of her story. And then I come to the conclusion. We are in a difficult body, in a difficult world, in a crazy world. Now, surely, in a world that has lost its bearings. It is only here that we have an explanation of what is going on, what is the meaning of it all. And it is so important to go into it and to realize it for ourselves. But then you have that reminder of Sri Aurobindo, which I have already quoted a couple of times. It was you who have chosen to be what you are now, human in this body. It was you. And he wrote that to Nirodbaran, which has, of course, inserted it in his correspondence with Sri Aurobindo. And here I will want to give the whole text which Sri Aurobindo has written, because it sums up everything that I have tried to say up to now. In the beginning it was you, he says to Nirodbaran, he says to every one of us. Not a human you, which now is complaining, but a central being, which is called Jivatman. Because our soul is part of the divine. But our soul is being, it is always being, formation, shape in the one. And for our mind, our divisive mind, it is so difficult to understand that what can be everything while being something. And it is like the mother's consciousness when she was there on that balcony giving darshan, as I have seen her, who saw everybody while being she there and all the others in different bodies standing there looking up to her. The one can be everything, everything can be the one. In the beginning it was you who accepted or even invited the adventure of the ignorance. Sorrow and struggle are a necessary consequence of the plunge into the inconscience and the evolutionary emergence of it. The explanation is that it had an object, the eventual play of the divine consciousness and Ananda, not in its initial transcendence, but under conditions for which the plunge into the inconscience was necessary. It is fundamentally a cosmic problem and can be understood only from the cosmic consciousness. If you want the solution which will be agreeable to the human mind and feelings, I am afraid there is none. No doubt, if human beings had made the universe, they would have done much better. But they were not there to be consulted when they were made. Only your central being was there. And he says the same, so beautifully, more beautifully in Savitri. O mortal who complainest of death and fate, accuse none of the harms thyself hast caused. This troubled world thou hast chosen for thy home. Thou art thyself the author of thy pain. Once in the immortal boundlessness of self, in a vast of truth and consciousness and light, the soul looked out from its felicity. It felt the Spirit's interminable bliss. It knew itself deathless, timeless, spaceless, one. It saw the eternal, lived in the infinite. Then, curious of a shadow thrown by truth, it strained towards some otherness of self. It was drawn to an unknown face peering through night, and it plunged into the night. And here we are, trudgingly, courageously towards tomorrow, preparing for the miraculous. And I will finish with these two lines from Savitri. And none could bear but for his strength within. Yet none would live because of his delight. And having tried to give some approach of the fundamental problems of our existence, I want to thank you for making this kind of talk possible. You have come, I am a happy man at the moment. I have finished the series of 10 talks, which at the moment, at the beginning, seemed hardly possible. You have made it possible through your presence, your empathy, and your own aspiration. Thank you very much. Namaskar, Vanakkam. Thank you.